In this lesson, we're going to go over separation color theory and how it applies to screen printing, DTG, and even DTF. You can learn something from this. Let's go.
This will be a real simple lesson. Now we have hue, saturation, and value. And I'm going to dive into those just a little deeper. But as you can see here, hue is essentially all the different colors. Your yellow, green, blue, purples, magentas, reds, oranges, so on and so forth. Saturation is the intensity of those colors. So the more we pull back the saturation, the duller that color will be. And then we have value. Now, I'm going to dive into what value is here in a second, but let's go ahead, we'll dive into hue. With simulated process screen printing, there are primary colors. So our primary colors are indicated here by the big circles, right? So we have red, yellow, and blue. And those three colors in themselves will make up just about every single color. With those overlapping, we get our secondary colors. So our secondary colors in this particular image, with them overlapping, we have orange, purple, green, and then we have black. Now that's what you would kind of consider a rich black. Our secondary colors being orange, purple, green, and in simulated process screen printing, the way it works is we're generally using a white base for a color shirt. Perhaps we're printing on white, then we don't need the white base. Some instances we do need a black. You might think to yourself, well, why not use red, yellow, and blue to make a black? You kind of can, but it's generally more of a brown. There's a concept called rich black where you're using all three of those colors and you print black on top of it just to make sure it's a really dense black, but that's really not, we don't have to worry about that with simulated process. So we have our red, blue, and yellow, which are our primary colors, and then we have purple, green, turquoise, gray, and white. And I'll explain the reasoning behind using gray and white. Purple, obviously here, looks more like magenta. We can create a purple with our red and blue. However, this purple is somewhat magenta, pretty much is magenta, and we need that purple in order to create as many colors as we can, because we can't create that color based off of red and blue. We're going to create a deeper purple. And then same thing for green and turquoise. Now we're not creating a turquoise per se by just overlapping yellow and blue. We have some variations to that with our halftones. And then gray is really just to, so we're not relying on halftones to create a gray. For example, white on a black shirt. Certainly you can give the illusion of gray. However, if you have space on your press to use gray, I would highly suggest doing so. And then our highlight white, generally when we're printing white on a t-shirt, without doing a print flash print, we're getting more of like an 80 to 85% gray rather than a bright white. Therefore, we print our white on top. Why not just print flash print the white and do the rest of the colors? Well, you're stacking up ink, making it thicker, using more white ink than necessary, and the white highlight itself plays a crucial role in creating pastel colors. Now, if we come over to this graphic here, this is a separation I did for a gentleman where it had all these colors and they wanted to keep it to 5 or 6 colors. Let's pull that open in Photoshop and I'll show you the separations that I did for it in order to meet their needs. And let's turn all this off. So we have our white base. Actually, let me go back real quick and we'll take a look at the image as we received it. Now you can see here there are some different shades of blue, turquoise, cyan, all kinds of shades going on there. We have orange, in which we can use our red and yellow to create orange. Same thing with kind of this fiery kind of sunset background. But let me show you what I did here. So we have our white base. You mentioned that it was going on a color shirt, so we included a black to give the to add black on there, because we're not going to try and create black with all the colors. Then we're using a red, a blue, a lemon yellow. I told him if he can fit the extra room to use a cool gray to essentially give it some more depth to that black and then the white base, but not absolutely necessary. And then we have our highlight white. Now you see what the highlight white did here is it essentially pulled back some of those blues and made it more of a pastel color. And you might be wondering, well, why not just make it towards where you're printing less blue there? We're going to discuss a phenomenon called gain, in which even though you have a 50% dot, it might end up being 60% on press. So we control that with our highlight white, but also it adds a little more depth in creating pastel colors and pulling back other colors. Say, for example, this kind of pink color right here. We'll get a little bit of highlight white in that area rather than trying to pull back those red dots. And then there's other little sections such as in the mountain and all that. Let me go ahead and show you what we're looking at here, and it's very faint. So mainly we're hitting the really bright white areas with that highlight white. And letting that highlight white, essentially just kind of make some of those colors pastels, others lighter, and then your bright white, a bright white. Make sense so far? I hope so. And as always, you can go over to the Facebook group if you need further clarification as you're working through these separations and learning how to really dial in and master simulated process printing. Let's go back over to our presentation here. So we got rid of a handful of colors. As you can tell, there are some blues in that water that disappeared, and we did kind of have to choose which side of the blue that water would lean towards. I mean, we could always go back to that blue, and we could always change this color to whatever shade of blue you want it to be. That's going to make you and your client happy. Now, value, when we talk about value, when we're doing our separations, let's go back over to this example here. Or actually, let me open up. We'll close this down. Let's open this up. Now, when we turn it to grayscale, we go to image mode and grayscale. That effectively is the value. And when we're doing separations and we want really bright colors, like say, for example, this red here, if we want that really bright, well, when we're turning it into a white base, the value on the white base itself. So let's go ahead and run through this real quick. And this will help you to adjust colors. Now, here's our white base, right? So if we wanted that to be a bright color, like it is here originally, we're going to have to come to this white base and add some more to that white base in order for it to really stand out, which segues me to the next section here. And I've just got a couple little graphics here with this white base. We have 100% white here, which in our separation I was just showing you, So if we turn off our t-shirt color, here's the value, right? On screen, this is the representation here. The closer you are to black in your separation, the more it's going to put down of that color. Now, going back to this little graphic here, as you can see, the more white we put down, and we put some red over the top of it, the brighter that red is going to be indicated here. Now, let's say this was 50% gray or 50% white. Let's just say you're using a white base with halftones. We print red over the top of that. This effectively here, this little sliver is a good representation of what you can expect as far as brightness goes. Now, if we had no white base whatsoever, this area here, these two sections, represent what it would look like with no white base whatsoever. And I'm sure some of you at some point in time have tried printing a color with no white base and you notice it's not bright at all, and you're like, oh, well, let me flash it and hit it again, rather than trying to use a white base. I think we've all experimented with that. So in order to get a brighter color, increase the amount of white base going down and potentially the amount of whatever that color it is as well. And we'll dive into how to do that in a future video. And we kind of talk about it in some of these videos as we're going through showing you how to use action steps and how to do your separations. But just kind of want to give you a high level overview of everything at this point in time. Now, our highlight white, let's say we got our white base down and we got a color on top of it. If we need to pull that back, certainly we could reduce the color going on top of it, reducing its value to, let's say, 50%. But we can run into gain on press where those colors become darker than you wanted them to. And we're going to talk about gain in an upcoming lesson in this module. But a surefire way to control that is to use a highlight white. And you can see here we have a red and a blue dot, not necessarily in that order. We got red and then we got blue. So if we print white over the top of that, we'll get a pastel color. Depending on how much white you put down will vary how much you're dulling that back or how pastel-y it will look. I'm sure some of you out there have done a white base, printed a color, and then maybe accidentally printed your white base on top of all your print colors and noticed that you still see some of that color coming up through. So that's what's happening here with our highlight white. Not only is it used to make whites really bright white, but it's also used to just make some of those colors a pastel color, just like this example here with the boat with the water. Use some white just to kind of pull back some of those blues, give it a little bit of a reflection, and so that way we weren't relying as much on the blue, pulling back the blue in order to make that happen. As you can see here, we have it pulled back in those areas, but also to add that highlight white really helps to pull some of those blues back. So let's do a little bit of a summary here. So we have hue, saturation, and value. Hue is the color, shade of color. Saturation is the amount of color. The more you pull color back, the less colorful it's going to be, essentially. And then value is essentially the intensity of that particular color in a black and white value to an extent. And we have red, yellow, and blue primary colors. With simulated process printing, we're using additional colors so that way we don't have to rely on those colors mixing. If you have more room on your press, add as many as your client can afford, as your press can hold. Otherwise, for the most part, even if you're just to use white, red, blue, and yellow, you can still produce some pretty awesome looking prints, even on a black shirt, which you have seen in one of our lessons using only 4 colors. But the more of these secondary colors you can add, so that way it can do the heavy lifting rather than letting the overlapping simulated process colors do the work. Technically, with this boat loan guy thing, it would have been nice to have had a extra color in there for orange, but able to pull it off with just the red and the yellow. And again, going back to value, how it translates to simulated process printing, we're creating our white base based off of those values. Therefore, sometimes we need to increase those values in order to create and increase the saturation, the brightness on to the t-shirt. Action Steps does quite a bit of that, but there's never been a single time where I need to go in and adjust the white base, the highlight white, or some of the colors. It's just all part of the process. Lastly, our white base. The more white base you put down, the brighter it's going to be. The less, the darker that overprint color is going to be. And in order to pull back your colors, you can pull back the color, but ideally, if you're using a highlight white, you can use that white in order to make those a little more pastel. So the underbase is going to give you darker, right? The highlight white, lighter shade of that, I guess, is a good summary. And then last but not least, something I almost kind of skipped over, and the saturation spectrum of things is we can't print RGB colors. I'm going to dive into a more in-depth tutorial on that and why. But in a nutshell, RGB is light. We cannot reproduce light onto a print. So you need to convey that to your clients if they come to you with a graphic like this here that's just completely oversaturated with RGB colors, and say, hey, this is what it's going to look like. And we have some pretty bright color inks, and we even have fluorescent. I don't think there's ever been a complaint, aside from when someone's expectations is that their shirt's going to look like a night light or glow lights or whatever that pegboard game was. So there you have it. I hope this tutorial was enlightening. I'm going to dive into some more of these in depth, because I think we need to know this. I know it. Oops, hit the microphone. I know it, and it's something that you need to know in order to be able to tweak your art. And when you open up these pieces of art and do your separations, you know immediately where to go in order to adjust it, so that way it will look like how you want to on press.
If that video was helpful, let me know down in the comments that it helped you out. Be sure to subscribe for more helpful tips and tutorials such as these. And we'll see you in the next video. Don't forget to like this one as well. See you soon.